Ka tira tēnā rā tātou e te hore. Members, the House is resumed. Before the dinner break, we were discussing the taxation annual rates for 2019-20, GST Offshore Supplier Registration and Remedial Matters Bill. Dr. Duncan Webb has the call and he has 9 minutes and 4 seconds remaining. Point of order, Matt Ducey.
Yeah, as you'll be well aware, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
That was close, wasn't it? Dr. Duncan Webb.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying before the dinner break, really this is ironing out some wrinkles, and the members for the other side protest that this is in fact new tax. It's not. What it's doing is really just closing some loopholes that some of the smarter taxpayers have been using to minimise their obligations and deprive the New Zealand people of the money they need for the projects that this government is undertaking. And really, when we look at the ring fencing of losses in respect of residential properties, the fact of the matter is that it's entirely inappropriate, on the one hand, for us to have a bright line test and at the same time have tax losses which are being used to offset against other income. So what we have here is an entirely sensible approach. And let's just remember, this is not saying that losses cannot be claimed. It's not even saying that losses can't be claimed across years. In fact, if the members of the other side read the bill, they would see that the losses can always be claimed against the property even when it's sold. So that's the ultimate, that is the ultimate point at which these losses can be claimed, if indeed there is an overall loss in the business enterprise of the residential property. And the legislation allows for a portfolio approach where you club all your properties together, or a property-by-property approach. That's entirely up to the taxpayer to manage their own taxation affairs. So what we have here is really just saying, look, a few taxpayers have been gaming the system in a way which is entirely inappropriate. They have been minimising their taxes in a way where it's not appropriate, because there's no long-run evening out. And that's really what we're achieving here, nothing more and nothing less. And of course, the same is the case in respect of the GST reforms. What we've seen is a massive growth in small cross-border transactions. We all know, some people have referred to it as the Amazon tax, but it's not just a tax on large suppliers. There's many suppliers all around the world, and anyone who meets the GST threshold of $60,000 of turnover in New Zealand will be expected to register for GST. And what we've seen is about a tripling over the past few years of the amount of transactions that meet this threshold. And what that has meant, and quite unfairly, people in New Zealand, retailers in New Zealand, hard-working mums and dads in New Zealand have been paying GST as part of the prices of their goods, whereas someone overseas in Australia or the United States or elsewhere have been able to sell their goods tax-free. An entirely inappropriate tax advantage. That means that New Zealand businesses aren't getting a fair crack. They're bearing more of the tax burden than they should. So once again, this is a sensible ironing out of what is essentially a loophole. Previously, it was thought the costs of collecting the tax probably outweighed the benefits of it because the kind of internet business was so small. But what Minister Nash has identified, and in fact what I understand the previous government was looking at, is the fact that the amount of this tax is now sufficiently significant to warrant the taxation, the revenue putting resources into it, and of course will have the collateral positive benefit of evening out the tax position for overseas suppliers and also for New Zealand suppliers. Another great thing, and the tax bill, of course, does another important thing that I want to mention before I close, and that is it tidies up the tax legislation. Every year we try to make this legislation more workable, more understandable, more consistent, more plain English, believe it or not. And a lot of the bill actually goes to that. It's something you won't hear talked about in the House very much, but it's ongoing maintenance. It's going around and painting the house every year to make sure that it's still fit for purpose. So what we have here is a great piece of legislation. Minister Nash has brought it to the House. Yes, it will bring in some more revenue, but what it's really about is making sure the tax rules are fair and consistent across the board for all players, whether it be in respect of rental properties, GST, some of those smaller things like student loans and sexual abuse victims. So that's a great piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
Speaker.
The Right Honourable David Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And for those who are just tuning in after